This is Dave Middlebrook with The Law and You, and I really appreciate you joining us for this very special and important episode. Today we're going to be talking about family law, but specifically the issue of divorce. Now, if you haven't experienced this personally, then you probably have someone in your family, you certainly know someone that's gone through the difficult process of divorce. And I've asked my friend and my colleague, Cindy Dunn. Cindy, welcome. Cindy's a board-certified family law specialist. She's going to be helping us understand the issues of divorce. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Listen, Cindy, in getting ready for this episode, I did a bit of research and I found a quote that really struck me. And it was by an author. I'm not familiar with her. Author's name is Frances Mays. But she said, do you know the most surprising thing about divorce? She says, it doesn't actually kill you. Now, is that true? I mean, is the divorce process that painful for your clients?
It certainly can be. It absolutely can be. One of the handouts that I give all my new clients is the 5 stages of grief. Wow. Because it is the death of a relationship. It is one of the most significant things that a person can go through in their adult life, short of loss of a family member. It absolutely is a grief process, and it's important to understand that and understand how that plays into the process.
Now, tell those, I know, but I want you to share with the folks that are watching, how did you get into this area of practice? Because I view it as ministry. I mean, not in a classical sense, but you're really ministering to these folks, and you're helping children, you're trying to protect families. It's really ministry, isn't it?
It is, and I get asked that a lot. I grew up in a small town in Louisiana, and people say, how did a girl from a small town in Louisiana end up as a Dallas divorce lawyer? And I don't really look at it that way. To me, family law, obviously, there's a lot of divorce, but it is an opportunity to talk to people about the thing that's the most important thing in their life, which is their family. Mm-hmm. And that was never the plan. When I went to law school, went to the University of Texas, I didn't take a single class having to do with a divorce, marital property, family law, nothing. That was one of the topics I studied to pass the bar exam. But I was blessed because when I was interviewing for jobs, I interviewed with a relatively smaller firm in Irving, Texas, and the senior partner who interviewed me was a family law specialist. And he said, have you ever thought about doing family law? And I, no, haven't. And he said, if you want to help people and you want to be able to work directly with people on something that's the most important thing in their life, come try it. Work with me, give it a shot. And I've never looked back, and it's been 26 years ago. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, I will tell you, Cindy and I have committed to each other to help one another not use legalese terms, but like most areas of the law, there's specialty terms that we're going to encounter. We'll try to stop and define them for the folks that are watching. And I also have to pause for a moment and remind you that we're in Texas, if you couldn't tell from the flag over my shoulder, specifically in historic downtown Grapevine, Texas. And so the things we're going to be talking about are Texas-based specifically, but generally I think the principles we'll be discussing are applicable around the country. Now, most importantly, if you're watching and you need to get legal advice on this issue, family law, then you need to seek out competent legal counsel in your state, right?
Absolutely,
okay.
100%, because there are similarities, but every state, family law particularly, is state law. It's not government. It's not United States. It's each state is different.
And when we use family law, sometimes people associate family law and divorce and thinking they're synonymous, but it's not the case, right?
Oh, it's not. We have so many issues, and it all involves families and children and property, but just in my practice alone, we obviously do a lot of divorce work, but as you know, the courts can come back and change things in people's custody schedules. So, we do a lot of modification cases. We do a lot of child support cases. We have paternity cases. We do adoption work. We do grandparent access cases. So family law is really broad. It's not just divorce, although that may be the thing that impacts most people.
Sure. I was thinking in preparation for today that why is it so complicated? Why don't we just get out a pair of scissors and cut everything in half and everybody go about their way. But it's not a simple matter, because when people come together and get married, everything, right? Everything,
Right.
the house, the cars, the vacation home, including the children and everything, has to be addressed in a divorce proceeding, right?
Yes, yes. And Texas, they're obviously different states are different, but Texas is what we call a community property state, which means when someone goes into court to ask for a divorce, the court starts out assuming that everything you own is jointly owned by the two of you. That's where it starts. And so in order to maybe separate some things, maybe you were given a family inheritance, something that was in your family, the burden is on you in Texas to prove that that is your separate property. Other states are not necessarily community property states. Again, that's why it's really important that you talk to an attorney in your state. But the process in Texas, if you don't know your rights, you don't understand how the court's going to, where the court's going to start in looking at your particular case, maybe you won't be prepared for what happens when you get to that stage. And so I really think that is the most important thing that people can take away from today is do some planning. And by planning, I don't mean plan to get divorced, but plan for what happens if somebody you know does, your family member does, your sibling, one of your children, maybe even your parents, right? And so it's important. People plan for months for their wedding.
Yeah.
But frequently I have people come to me that are confronted with the idea of a divorce and they've never thought about it before. And so I think that's something that people can take away from today is do a little planning to know what your rights are, to know what that process looks like, because it will impact somebody you know. And maybe you need to, maybe that's your role in their life, is to say, hey, talk to this person.
Right.
And so I think everybody needs to understand the process and have somebody that they can reach out to when that happens to them or to their family member.
And I'm hopeful this program can do that in part. And I think about the planning aspect. My wife and I just recently bought a home, and we moved from one area to another, and we're like, well, what hospital are we going to go to if there's an accident? What ambulance company do we call? It's not, I'm not planning to be in an accident, but I'm just preparing. If I'm in one, I at least want to have that in my mind so that I can be equiped to do that. Right?
Exactly. And and we do that in all areas of our life. We have life insurance, we have car insurance, we have health insurance. We have lots of systems in place in case we need them, but we hope that we won't need them. Right? That's that old saying, plan for the worst and hope for the best.
Yeah.
But divorce is, it is a dirty word in some people's minds. Like, who wants to plan for a divorce? But you can't avoid it. Everyone will have someone that they know that they're close to that goes through this process.
I'm going to read these because I want to make sure I get them accurate for the broadcast here. But I was looking at the statistics. And almost 50% of all marriages in the United States will end in divorce or separation. The next statistic said that researchers estimate that 41% of all first marriages end in divorce, 60% of second marriages, and 73% of third marriages end in divorce. Is that consistent with what you see?
Yes.
Okay, I want to talk about that in a minute and why that is.
Yes.
But here was the zinger for me as a born-again evangelical Christian. The divorce rate for evangelicals and born-again Christians is basically the same as Americans who claim no religion at all, according to George Barna, who I have tremendous respect for. So is that shocking to you?
It's actually not. It's not, because, again, throughout the entirety of my practice, I've been very fortunate to have a lot of people that are in ministry, that are Christians, that have reached out to me to talk to me about representing somebody they know.
Because you're a believer, and that's why. Yeah.
And for somebody to refer that person to me, I mean, that is the best compliment I can ever receive.
Of course.
And but because of that, I have represented so many people that and where it's hard is there is a reluctance to maybe even understand and accept that process is going to happen, even if somebody doesn't want it to happen, because you can't you can't prevent that.
Yeah.
If a marriage, if one's in Texas in particular, if one party wants a divorce, then that divorce will eventually happen.
You know, that is the perfect segue into one of the questions that we received. And I thank you for folks that email me and have questions. We love to given the opportunity to answer questions. And one of the questions we have here is, let me get to it. Sorry. Okay. My husband has filed for divorce. I believe the marriage can be saved. Can I get the judge to stop him from divorcing me so we can continue to work on saving our marriage?
The short answer is you can't.
Now that's really amazing to me. Why is that?
So, and it goes back to what I said before, which is, people spend all this time working together to plan to get married. But the problem is it takes two to get married, but it only takes one to get divorced. Because Texas has a version of no-fault divorce. The word for it that we use in Texas is insupportability. Okay, so one person can't be a team.
So like in California, you hear irreconcilable differences.
Yes.
Insupportability in Texas, are those synonymous?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And you hear people say no-fault divorce.
Okay.
And again, it goes back to the courts are obviously secular courts. They don't make people stay married. They don't make people work on their marriage because they know that you can't be a team of one. Right?
Sure.
If you no longer have a team with the same goals, inevitably it's going to fail.
Yeah.
And so if one person is willing to come in and say, the marriage is irretrievably broken, it's insupportable, and I want a divorce, that will eventually happen. You can delay it. You can, make the process take longer. When there are children involved, sometimes the courts will order family counseling, but only as it relates to the children and the children's ability to process the divorce, not to prevent the parents from divorcing.
Okay, I want to hit rewind for a moment and talk about some terms. We use the term community property. Texas is a community property state.
Right.
Now, I did take family law when I was in law school. It's the highest grade I ever made in law school. But I remember specifically my professor saying the Spanish land grant states, Florida, all the way around to California, up, I guess, to Oregon, those are community property states because that was the law in Spain.
Right.
Okay, so community property means you get married and anything you accumulate while you're married is
joint
ownership, right?
Yes.
What about the other states?
The other states have more of it's not community property. They would view it more as a income that you earn is your sole management property. Income that your spouse earns might be their sole management, and it requires more of an intentional act to have something owned jointly.
Okay.
As opposed to saying, hey, unless you say otherwise, it's joint. It looks at it more from the opposite way to say, if it's not necessarily joint unless you wanted it to be joint.
Okay.
But all states at some point are going to divide marital property. It's just a difference of how they define it and how they get there.
Otherwise, you can't get divorced.
Right.
The other term that I want to pause and talk about for a moment is no-fault divorce. We talked about that quite a bit, but what is fault? I mean, is there fault-based divorce?
There are.
Okay.
The law before Texas adopted the insupportability ground for divorce, and they're still in the family code. There are grounds for divorce.
I have to pause and say, this is going off in my brain. Insupportability because of discord and conflict between the parties such that
it destroys the legitimate ends
yes,
of the marriage relationship.
I remember, yes.
That's good.
Yeah, that was like, okay.
Yes.
That's weird that I remember that. But so in those states, because like in movies and stuff back in the 50s, and you'd see the private eye and
right.
They had to make a case, right?
Right, but think about how destructive that can be.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
Because in a case where people don't have children, maybe they're going to get divorced and they'll never have to see each other again. They'll never have to interact. But when people have children, imagine how destructive that can be to have to go into court and prove to a judge that your spouse has done one or more
terrible things.
Adultery, abuse, addiction. I always tell people you don't need a judge to tell you that you have moral grounds for a divorce. You don't. You need a judge to tell you that you have legal grounds for a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And no-fault divorce, insupportability in Texas, irreconcilable differences, that is a ground for divorce. So why go into court, particularly when you have children, and put all that out there when you don't have to?
Yeah. Okay, so that's no-fault divorce. I've got a list of things I want us to talk about here.
Sure.
Now, another thing, and I jokingly say almost with everybody that I talk to who's a lawyer, the term litigator, you said, who I didn't think I was going to be a litigator.
Right.
And I jokingly say, that's not alligator, it's litigator. That means going to court all the time.
Right.
So family law and marriages are resolved in the context of litigation.
They are.
They are.
They are, but there are a lot of different ways to get there.
Doesn't that seem kind of weird, though? I mean,
it is, but it is a contractual relationship in a weird sort of way.
and that's because it touches and concerns so many things, right?
Yes.
I mean, the boat, the car, the house.
Right.
Yeah,
all of your property, everything
kids.
you own, your
Sure.
children, everything.
Okay.
But it is a contractual relationship. And so when you've agreed to jointly do all of these things with this other person,
Okay.
to undo all of that, if you don't have an agreement, there's no other way to do it. It is an adversarial process. That doesn't mean you have to be adversarial. And I have people call me all the time and say, oh, well, we're going to get divorced, but we're going to do it amicably.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? We don't want to hire attorneys. We want to do it amicably. And I say, hiring an attorney means that you're going to fight? Because I think people assume that, right?
Yeah.
We're going to go to court and we're going to have a battle over this. But even more important than the statistics about what percentage of cases end in divorce, the other statistic that I tell people is the high 90%, you will settle your case. You will reach an agreement and never have to go to a trial in your divorce case. High 90 percentile.
Okay.
And there are lots of ways to get to that stage. And so we talk about most courts in Texas, and again, it's a process that is supported by all states, which is mediation. Steps that you can take before you go in front of a judge. You can hire a mediator who...
Okay, so tell everybody what that means.
Right. It's like a negotiation.
Okay.
But in family law, you don't sit around the same table, typically, because it can be emotional, right? You don't
Sure.
want to have that all day long.
Yeah.
So one party will be in one room, the other party's in another room, and there's a mediator that goes back and forth and says, let's try this. What if we did this thing? What if we did that thing? It's a way to negotiate your divorce using an intermediary,
And God
using
bless
somebody
the
in between.
mediators. I mean, seriously, it takes a special
Oh, yes.
something to be a good mediator.
Oh,
and the good
yes.
ones are great, right?
Yes. And everybody, every attorney that I know, if you say, tell me your top 5 mediators, they know, right?
Yeah, those are your go-tos.
Yes, and if we go in front of a judge and a judge would say, have you gone to mediation yet? Do you need me to appoint a mediator? Good lawyers all say, oh no, we can agree on somebody, because we know, right?
Yeah.
We know who can work with us and help us resolve that. But mediation is a step that you can go through, because there's so many steps to try to reach an agreement, and that's why there's so many cases that do eventually settle.
So to be clear, if I was a divorce attorney, I'm not, but you're representing wife, I'm representing husband, and then we are in litigation and we hire another person, a mediator, who's going to go back and forth.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, explain this to me, because this is an exciting concept and I don't fully understand it, but it's the concept of collaborative law. Now, that's got to be a pretty exciting development. Tell us about that.
Yes, and collaborative law was not started in Texas, although it has been adopted and included in the Texas law. So there are lots of states that have collaborative law or a version of it. And the collaborative law process allows you to, essentially, you had to file for divorce in a court in order to start your process. But then you're able to go and say, we're going to try to resolve this through the collaborative law process. And the court literally kind of puts a pause on your courtroom activities and says, come back if you can't do this on
And we're
your
going to go to
own.
mediation, if that, right?
Right, but the collaborative process is even more steps prior to that, because the collaborative law process does set up opportunities for joint meetings. You hire joint experts, so it's not your property value evaluator and their appraiser. You hire one.
Okay, so wait. Let me understand. So in this situation, collaborative law, husband is going to hire you, And wife's going to hire you?
No.
No? Okay.
No. Husband hires me, or
Uh-huh.
wife hires me. The other spouse hires an attorney.
Okay.
But they agree that we're not going to take this in front of a judge. We're going to collaborate and try to work out our own
okay.
agreement with the help of lots of other individuals along the way. But if we need help figuring out children issues, we can hire a counselor that will work with the family. And so the idea is that you build this team. Everyone does have their own attorney, but the rest of the team works together collaboratively to try to reach an agreement on everything. And there are pros and cons to that process.
Okay. So thank you for that. I want to get to what I think everybody watching, everybody in this room, we all have a soft spot for the children, right? We want to make sure the best interest of the children is taken care of.
Yes.
So explain to us a little bit how that works in terms of custody. Is that a court-ordered thing, or is it negotiated, or how does that work?
Okay, so in Texas, if you have a divorce and you have children, what you really have is two different lawsuits. Okay, you've got the divorce where the court's going to decide how to divide property between the parents and eventually grant the divorce. But then you also have what they call the suit affecting parent-child relationship, which is how do we make decisions for the children? And that part of the case actually stays in effect, right? Even after your divorce, that piece of your lawsuit, of your divorce case, carries on because things change.
For how long?
Until the children are 18 and have graduated from high school.
Okay.
In Texas. And other states have different rules on that, but generally speaking, it's when they turn 18 and when they've graduated from high school.
So in that situation, the parent-child thing, the court is overseeing and making sure the children are taken care of until they're adults.
Yes. And it requires one of the parents to come back and ask the court to make a change.
Right.
But the court has, and again in Texas, legal terms, but the court has continuing jurisdiction. In other words, the court hangs on to that part of the file. And the court says, oh, the Smiths are back and they want to talk about child support. Here's their file. Let's look at what we did before. Let's let them tell us what's changed. And if we need to change something, we can do that. So that you don't start, the idea is that you have some continuity so that the court can always see what was done before, what the agreement was, what did the court order say, and what needs to be changed.
Okay.
And frequently, other than a divorce, that's the most frequent case that I handle is a modification. And it can be a modification of possession terms.
Okay.
Maybe the children have decided they want to live primarily with the other parent.
Gotcha.
Child support changes. But the court maintains that ability to change that child-related part of the order until the children are adults, essentially.
Okay. What about grandparents? I mean, we talked about the parents, but what about the grandparents?
Yes.
Do they have rights?
Grandparents do have rights, and different
In
states
Texas.
In Texas,
Yeah.
different states have different rules. Okay, and so again, these issues are complex, but essentially grandparents do have rights. It depends on the situation, obviously, but in a situation where perhaps one of the parents is deceased, one of the parents is incarcerated, we see that a lot, or if one of the parents is just incapacitated, right? As a grandparent, you see that maybe your child or your child's spouse is struggling with addiction issues. As the grandparent, you may have to step in. Why? Because the court wants to make sure that those best interests of the children are protected.
Okay, but it doesn't nullify somebody's parental rights, right?
It doesn't. It doesn't. And again, it depends on the situation because there are very strict rules about what grandparents can ask for, right? Grandparents can't step into a healthy co-parent, mom and dad just don't agree with grandma on something. Grandma can't come in and ask for custody. But depending on the circumstances, grandparents can ask for access, meaning give me a court-ordered ability to see my grandchild. The courts will grant those. And in certain situations, grandparents can ask for custody.
And has it always been that way, or is this a recent?
It has changed a lot. There's always been a possibility of it, but it's certainly changed a lot. And there have been some recent Supreme Court cases, not just Texas Supreme Court, but U.S. Supreme Court cases.
And that would apply to everybody.
Yes,
That's
yes.
the big dogs, right?
Yes, addressing grandparent rights.
Yeah, okay.
And so it's been an interesting developing area of the law for sure. And there was a recent Texas Supreme Court case this year addressing rights of other parties, not just the parents, to be involved and to have court-ordered relationships with children, because a lot of times you have step-parents. So,
interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, there's so many things I want to ask you about, and I'm not going to get to all of them. But one one question I have for you is, what percentage? And I know you're guessing here, but what percentage of the folks that you encounter is there a premarital? And first of all, tell us what a premarital agreement is.
Right.
But
right.
how many people use premarital agreements?
Premarital agreements are frequent, and you can hear them called premarital agreements, prenups. You can actually sign one after you get married. But
Is that called a postnup?
it is called a postnup.
Snap.
But all states have them. And again, this is an area that is very state specific in terms of the rules that apply to signing a premarital agreement. But essentially, it's a contract that you and your fiance would sign before you got married that decides, maybe changes the rules on how your property is going to be handled during your marriage.
Okay.
And so we see it in lots of different situations. I've certainly represented a lot of young couples starting out that say, hey, we want a premarital agreement. I've certainly handled the older couple that's on maybe the second marriage, and they have grown children from the first marriage that are concerned about, what happens to, maybe one of the parents died. What happens to mom's stuff if dad gets remarried to this new person? And so a lot of times you will see the older couple do a premarital agreement.
And is it normally the case that people that use these premarital agreements is because there's a lot of assets maybe, or
sometimes?
Not always?
Not always. What's interesting about that is, again, there are certain rules that the court's going to apply if somebody comes in to get divorced. And maybe you don't want those particular rules to apply. Doing a premarital agreement is a way to sort of change how your property would be divided. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you had property coming in. A lot of times people are concerned about protecting pre-marriage property, something they got from their family. But a lot of times you'll see young people who just starting out don't have property to protect, but they know what those rules will be, and they want to maybe change those rules by agreement, so that if things go badly in the future and they're faced with a divorce down the road, then they have already thought about that. They've done some advanced planning, right?
Sure.
You're not planning for a divorce, but you're planning for what happens if you get a divorce.
Well, like I said, there's so many issues, and it's because family law touches and concerns so many things. Really, it concerns life, right?
Right.
And I've always said I think a good family law attorney like you is one of the best, well-rounded lawyers there is, because you guys deal with everything, right?
Right. We have to know about your real estate. We have to know about your sale of your house. We have to understand your health insurance.
Your stocks.
Everything.
All that stuff, yeah.
Yes. So,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, the guy that encouraged you that you were really going to be able to help folks, I think that's true, because it is a terribly painful thing. And if you can minimize that, then that's really God's work. If you can minimize the pain, protect the kids, and people can move on, I think.
Yes.
Now I have a question for you. If you were to say, here's the one thing I wish that folks would do before getting married so that they don't end up getting a divorce, what would that be?
So,
like,
the family has changed, right?
Okay, tell
and
me.
so even from the time that you and I were kids, which is longer ago than we want to admit that it was, we had a stay-at-home parent.
Right.
We don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
Very few people have the ability to have a stay-at-home parent, but even the ones that do, people adopt roles in their marriage, right? So maybe you're the parent that has primary responsibility for the kids. You're the one that goes to the PTA meetings. You're the one that knows what's happening at school. You're the more of the hands-on parent with the kids, because maybe the other parent's job doesn't allow them to do that. But people assign roles. Who's going to pay the bills? Who manages the investments? And very few relationships are truly 50-50 across the board on all those tasks, because Sometimes one party's more suited for it. But people need to understand and be involved, okay? So make sure that even if you're not the person that pays the bills and you don't manage the investments, you don't necessarily know how much your house is worth, know those things.
Yeah, sure.
Be involved,
Yeah.
right? Be a participant in those things. If you're not the PTA parent, that's okay. Everybody doesn't have the ability to do that. But know what's going on with your kids. Be involved. Because if you get divorced, you have to do both of those things. And so if you plan to be able to do those things, you're supporting your other parent, right?
Yeah.
And by planning for that, you're maybe avoiding that situation.
Which we want you to avoid. No, we don't want anybody to get a divorce. And I
Right.
don't think anybody gets married plans on getting a divorce.
No, and I can't tell you the number of clients that have called me and said, oh, we're going to try to reconcile. I'm really sorry. Don't be sorry. I don't want you to get divorced. If you can work this
Amen.
out and not do this, I support that.
Amen.
I will help you figure it out. And that's
Yeah.
where those postmarital agreements come into play,
Sure.
right? Because you say, hey, we're going to try again, but we don't want to go down this road and have this big argument again. Let's maybe create some new ground rules.
Yeah.
And so frequently we do postmarital agreements to kind of maybe reset some ground rules and give people a chance to try to keep it together.
Yeah.
And stay married and avoid the divorce.
Yeah,
I
I feel your heart on that.
yeah, I never want client to apologize to me because they're trying not to get divorced.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for coming. I've learned more about this issue today, and I hope you guys have learned more about the issue of divorce. Now, we're talking about family law. This is episode 1, divorce. It's the difficult, the D word. The next episode, we're going to be talking about a little more exciting, I think, and that is adoption. And you see the email address below. If you have any questions about this topic or you want us to address other issues in the law, please send me an email. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you for joining us on The Law and You.